Hi, and welcome back to Mama's Footprint. Here you'll find inspiring ideas and concepts for eco-friendly parenting. This is our second video. We'll be covering parenting and climate change. I'll separate this video into two parts. First, we'll cover what climate change is and how we affect it. Then I'll cover how it affects our kids. My name is Pollyanna Raymer. I'm a college professor and a mom to these two cuties. If you haven't had a chance yet, please check out our very first video covering sustainability, ecological footprint, and how those two concepts apply to parenthood. To get updates on our new videos, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. When you tuck your child in bed at night, I'm guessing you use a single blanket, maybe two or even three on very cold nights. Imagine if you kept adding on blanket after blanket after blanket. Your child would start to get a little uncomfortable, right? They would likely start to sweat and feel fidgety and bothered. Climate change works in a similar way. Our planet has a natural layer of gases like a blanket called greenhouse gases that keeps us warm and toasty. These gases naturally trap the heat that comes from the sun and is reflected on the Earth's surface. There are three particular greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, that can be added on to that layer through human actions. The adding on of these three gases leads to what we call global warming. How our planet's climate responds to the rising temperature with floods, droughts, more intense hurricanes, for example, is called climate change. But what is the connection between parenting and climate change? I'll ask you to please be patient with me. I'll get there, I promise. But I need us to understand a few things before we can make that connection. The first thing we want to understand is the difference between weather and climate. Today is sunny and warm. Yesterday was cloudy and cold. A few months ago was snowy. What I'm saying here is not related to climate. I'm just reporting to you the weather of the last few months. I can even say that the last 4 years have been uncomfortably warm. That would still not be climate. Climate is a long-term trend, an average of the weather of the last 30 years. So when we say climate change, we're not talking about today's weather or last month's weather. We're not even talking about 2 years ago. We're talking about decades of change. Now, a lot of people will say that this is a natural phenomenon, that the Earth's temperature and CO2 concentrations tend to fluctuate, and we're just peaking right now before we go right back down. Well, be careful with half-truths. True, the temperature of our planet does fluctuate, and so do the levels of greenhouse gases. But take a look at this graph. We're going way back in time, 800,000 years. The graph is on average flat, forming an ice hockey stick's shaft, followed by a sharp increase on the right side, equivalent to the blade portion. So even though it's true, we do see that fluctuation, we understand that we are way off the chart in relation to the last 800,000 years. So let's understand a little bit more about these three greenhouse gases. The most important thing to know is that they're very different from one another, especially in their potential to trap heat. There's actually a term for that to distinguish that potential. It's called global warming potential. The higher the GWP, the more powerful the gas is in trapping heat here on Earth. This number can change depending on the range of time you're looking at, simply because these three gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, deplete at different rates. So when we talk about their heat trapping potential or their global warming potential, we use the same time frame for all three gases. It's common to use a time frame of 100 years. The most abundantly emitted greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, or CO2. In the US, it makes up for roughly 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions. CO2 has a global warming potential of 1, so it's used as a reference for the other two gases. Okay, now we get to slowly move into the topic of parenthood. Thank you for your patience. The top three sources of carbon dioxide emissions are energy, transportation, and industry. For energy, it's interesting to think that trying to reduce a kid's screen time is not only beneficial for their health, it's also beneficial for our planet's health. Unless you're using renewable energy like wind and solar, the hours of TV, video game, tablet, and so on are hours in which your household is contributing to CO2 emissions. You'll notice me saying this over and over again, but we all function in a very connected way with our planet. What's healthy for us tends to be healthy for our planet. What's unhealthy for us, like limitless hours of video game, tends to be unhealthy for the earth as well. That makes it easy to remember, right? Let's think transportation now. Granted that I have no idea where in the world you're watching this video from, I can't assume you can just hop on a bike and ride your kid to school. But what if you can? And you've just gotten used to the comfort of driving your car a few blocks down the street over and over again. Unless you drive an electric car, that CO2 is adding up. Or maybe you live far away from their school. Is it then possible to walk or ride your bike to a train or a metro station and avoid the traffic? If there are no trains where you live, can you take a bus? It's becoming more popular in bigger cities around the world to have public bikes and scooters, and all you need to do is pay through an app. The point is, oftentimes we don't use alternative modes of transportation simply because we don't stop to think about what the alternatives are or what else is out there other than our gas-fueled vehicles. Take a moment to think about this. Is your car really the only way to get your kids around? Okay, so industry is our third, and it's a very interesting category for CO2 emissions because it's so broad. From the packaged food we buy at the grocery store to the smartphone that we replace maybe every year, we live in an industrialized world. Carbon dioxide emissions is only one of the many reasons why we need to tone it down when it comes to purchasing industrialized products. Easier said than done? Maybe. Or maybe it's just one of those things that are challenging at first but become a habit after a while. Things like buying or receiving secondhand toys, clothes, and furniture for your kid's room. And by the way, I'll be making a video about that in the near future, how we can connect to our community and gift things that we no longer use but that can be useful to other people. Another thing you can do is maybe cook more often for your family, or even start cooking from scratch, right? So this is maybe just a meal initially. That is still a reduction in the emissions coming from packaged food. In the next few days, make it a point to observe how much you and your kids use in terms of energy, gas fuel transportation, and new industrialized products. Then talk to your kids about it and see how you can work together to reduce your CO2 emissions as a family. Make it a challenge, make it fun. You don't have to feel overwhelmed, and you don't have to guilt trip your kids into reducing their carbon footprint. Just be honest with them, use age-appropriate language to explain what's going on, and ask them to join you in fighting climate change. Okay, so the next gas is methane. Despite it not being as common as CO2, methane is definitely more potent in trapping heat. Its global warming potential is roughly 30 times that of CO2 in 100 years. A big source of methane emissions is domestic livestock, and I'd like to open up a parenthesis here. You may notice in my future videos that I'll try to avoid the topic of diet, and that's because I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian, and I don't feel comfortable making suggestions as to what your child should or shouldn't eat. Please be advised, I will explain to you how climate change is affected by our diet, but I ask you, if you choose to make any changes to your family's diet based on this information, that a professional would be consulted first. Okay, I'm closing my parenthesis here. As I mentioned, a big source of methane is domestic livestock through something called enteric fermentation. Enteric fermentation is where microbes decompose and ferment plant materials like fibers and sugars in their digestive tract. A byproduct of that is called enteric methane, and it's expelled through burping. Now, burping doesn't seem to be like such a problem until you consider that there are over 1 billion cows burping all over the world. Then it becomes a problem. The other main source of methane is landfill. Here's how it works. To put it in general terms, methane is often the byproduct of microbes that don't use oxygen to breathe. Those that use oxygen release CO2, those that don't use oxygen release methane, or CH4. In landfills, the goal is to squeeze as much trash into a hole as possible to make more room for more trash, right? So when the trash is being compacted, you're removing all the pockets of air. So the partial decomposition is done by those anaerobic microbes, or microbes that don't use oxygen. That's why it's important for us parents to teach our children to first reduce their waste. Ultimately, it's just best that we don't have all that much to throw away in the first place. Second, repurpose what they don't want. You can do that through donation, or for example, use things around the house in a new way, like a toothbrush becoming a paintbrush. Third, reuse. Again, avoid single-use products like Ziploc bags for their sandwiches, or those super cheap throwaway trinkets for party favors. Fourth, recycle what's possible. And fifth, rot or compost. I'll be talking about recycling and composting in 2 separate videos, so bear with me. Okay, the third gas is nitrous oxide, and we rarely hear about it because it's the least abundant. Now don't be fooled though, nitrous oxide has a GWP of nearly 300 times that of CO2 in 100 years. So where is that emission coming from? A huge majority comes from agriculture, especially the production of synthetic fertilizer. This is one of the main reasons why buying organic food and material in general reduces your ecological footprint. We'll also get to that in the near future. So what is it about climate change anyway? Why do we parents have to act against it? Well, for multiple reasons. According to the US National Climate Assessment, climate change is expected to bring us more frequent wildfires, longer periods of drought, increased number, duration, and intensity of tropical storms and hurricanes, and sea level rise between 1 and 4 feet. These are obviously dependent on where you live, and I'm not covering anything that's exclusively outside of the US. So this is a short list. But here's why parents need to act. Scientists often build and study climate models, which are different scenarios of our future based on what actions we take today. These models tend to cover anywhere between 2030 and 2100. Think about how old your child is, or your children are. Now do a little math. How old will they be in 2030, in 2050, in 2070? The point I'm trying to make is that we're raising the generation that will live through the climate models scientists analyze today. The people that will need to find jobs, a safe place to live, to raise their family, to find food and water, these people are our children. The modeled population is here, and we are raising it. When we say we want a bright and better future for our kids, it's not just about saving money for college and leaving them a fully paid house. The basis of their future is the changing climate. I say this and I urge you to act with me because I'm sending my 2 daughters into this unknown and scary future, and I want to do the very best I can to make sure that they will be okay. Will you please join me? In the upcoming weeks, I'll be posting our first video on the series of tips and tricks. I have a 4-month-old that stains her onesies with poop and a 5-year-old that loves to run around outside in her socks. Needless to say, I'm tempted to throw away their clothes all the time, but let's not. We just covered one of the environmental issues caused by landfill, so instead of throwing clothes away, I'll show you a very simple trick to remove impossibly hard stains using very mild soap, those that you can shower with, and sunlight. Stay tuned.